The sun sparkled like a million tiny diamonds on the water. Seabirds called out, their cries mixing with the gentle lapping of waves against the docks. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon at the Seabreeze Marina. Michael, a tall man with a warm smile and kind eyes, adjusted his sunglasses. He was buzzing with excitement. Today was the day. He was finally hosting a party on his brand new yacht, Innovation. Michael had worked incredibly hard to build his tech company from the ground up. He was a black tech CEO, and he was proud of his accomplishments, not just for himself, but for what it represented to others. He wanted to show everyone that with hard work and determination, anything was possible. Innovation was gleaming white, a sleek and modern vessel that bobbed gently in its slip. Music, a mix of upbeat pop and soulful R&B, drifted from the yacht speakers, adding to the festive atmosphere. Colorful balloons bobbed on the deck, tied to the railings. Platters of delicious-looking snacks and drinks were laid out on a long table. Friends began to arrive, their faces bright with anticipation. There was Sarah, a fellow entrepreneur who always had a contagious laugh, and David, Michael's best friend since childhood, who was never seen without a joke ready to tell. Maria, a talented artist, arrived with a handmade gift for the boat. Each friend brought with them an air of excitement and genuine happiness for Michael's success. "Michael, this is amazing!" Sarah exclaimed, giving him a hug. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thanks, Sarah." "I'm so glad you could make it," Michael replied, his smile widening. David clapped him on the back. "Innovation, huh? Fitting name for a guy who's always thinking outside the box." As more guests arrived, the yacht filled with laughter and chatter. People mingled, enjoying the music, the food, and the beautiful view. Michael felt a surge of gratitude. He was surrounded by people he cared about, celebrating a milestone he had worked so hard to achieve. He looked out at the sparkling water, the sun warm on his face, and thought, "This is perfect." He had envisioned this moment for so long. He imagined all of his future parties and how he would use the yacht to relax and enjoy life with his friends and family. He planned on taking his mother on a cruise and showing her all the places she had dreamed of visiting. He was also planning on taking underprivileged kids out for a day on the water, hoping to inspire them to dream big and work hard. The marina was a beautiful place, usually filled with the sounds of seagulls and the gentle clinking of boat masts. But today, the sounds of music and laughter were dominant, creating a joyous atmosphere that everyone seemed to enjoy, except, unbeknownst to Michael, one particular resident. Across the marina, in a neatly kept condo overlooking the docks, lived Karen. Karen was the self-appointed guardian of the Seabreeze Marina's rules and regulations. She was on the HOA, and she took her role very seriously. Some people might have called her a busybody. Others might have used stronger words. Karen considered herself a protector of the peace, a vigilant defender against any perceived infraction, no matter how small. Karen was peering through her lace-curtained window, a frown deepening on her face. The music from Michael's yacht drifted into her living room, disrupting the afternoon news program she was trying to watch. She hated loud noises. She preferred the quiet hum of her refrigerator and the gentle tick-tock of her grandfather clock. At first, it was just a minor annoyance. Honestly, she muttered to herself, adjusting her bifocals. Some people have no consideration. She reached for her remote, turning up the volume on the television, but the music still seeped through. Then, she noticed the crowd of people on the yacht. She hadn't seen any notices posted about a party. That's odd, she thought. There's usually a permit required for large gatherings like that. Her annoyance began to morph into suspicion. She squinted, trying to get a better look. She saw Michael, a black man, laughing with his guests. A seed of doubt, ugly and unwarranted, began to sprout in her mind. It wasn't just about the noise or the lack of a permit anymore. A prejudiced voice whispered in her ear, fueled by stereotypes and assumptions. Who is he? Where did he get the money for a yacht like that? He probably doesn't even belong here. Karen knew almost everyone who owned a boat at the marina, or at least, she thought she did. She recognized the usual weekend sailors, the retired couples who spent their days fishing, the families who took their kids out for tubing. But she didn't recognize Michael. She tapped her fingers impatiently on the windowsill. "This is simply unacceptable," she declared to her cat, Mr. Fluffernutter, who blinked sleepily from his perch on the sofa. "I need to find out what's going on. This could be a serious breach of the marina's rules." With a determined set to her jaw, Karen grabbed her purse, her phone, and her HOA rule book. She marched out of her condo, ready to confront the source of the disturbance and, in her mind, uphold the standards of the Seabreeze Marina, all while her prejudice festered beneath the surface. She truly believed she was acting in the best interest of the community, completely blind to her own biases. Karen marched down the dock, her sensible shoes clicking on the wooden planks. She clutched her purse tightly, her face set in a disapproving frown. As she approached Innovation, she could hear the music and laughter even more clearly. She stopped at the edge of the yacht, peering up at Michael, who was chatting with a group of his friends. She cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and demanding. Michael turned, a polite smile on his face. "Yes. Can I help you?" Karen planted her hands on her hips. "I'm Karen, and I'm on the HOA board here at Seabreeze Marina. I need to know what's going on here. Are you aware that you need a permit for large gatherings?" Michael's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't realized he needed a permit for a small get-together on his own boat. "Oh, I wasn't aware of that," he said calmly. "It's just a few friends celebrating." Karen wasn't satisfied. "And who are you? I don't recognize you. Are you even allowed to be here?" Her voice dripped with suspicion. Michael's easygoing demeanor began to fade. He straightened his shoulders, his eyes meeting Karen's directly. "I own this yacht," he stated clearly. "And I own the slip it's docked in." Karen scoffed. "Oh, really? And where's your proof? I've never seen you before. This looks like trespassing to me. This yacht doesn't belong to you." She gestured around dramatically. "This is a private marina. You can't just come in here and throw a party without permission." Michael sighed. He could feel his patience wearing thin. "I assure you, I'm not trespassing," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "I have all the necessary paperwork. I can show you the ownership documents." He motioned towards the cabin. "They're inside." He started to turn to retrieve the documents, but Karen cut him off. "Don't move. I don't believe you for a second. You probably stole this boat. I'm calling the police. They can sort this out." Michael's friends, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, started to step forward. David, ever the protector, put a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Karen, there's no need to call the police," he said, his voice firm. "Michael's a successful businessman. He wouldn't steal anything." But Karen was already dialing 911, her face flushed with indignation. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser at Seabreeze Marina," she said into the phone, her voice trembling with self-righteousness. "He's claiming to own a yacht, but I don't believe him. He's having a loud party and causing a disturbance. I think he might have stolen the boat." Michael looked at his friends, a mixture of disbelief and frustration on his face. He couldn't believe this was happening. All he wanted to do was celebrate with his friends, and now he was being accused of a crime he didn't commit, all because of one woman's prejudice and assumptions. The joy of the afternoon had been completely shattered. Karen clutched her phone, her knuckles white. She spoke into the receiver, her voice rising in pitch. "Yes, officer, it's a complete disruption. The music is deafening, people are shouting, and I'm afraid they're going to damage the other boats. He's refusing to identify himself properly and acting very suspiciously. I honestly think he might be dangerous." She glanced at Michael, who was now standing silently, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. His friends were huddled around him, murmuring words of support. The music had been turned down, and the festive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a heavy cloud of tension. "Yes, I'll wait here," Karen continued into the phone. "Please hurry. I don't know what he's capable of." She ended the call with a triumphant snap of her phone closed. She felt a surge of self-righteousness. She had done her duty. She had protected her community. But deep down, a tiny voice of doubt whispered in her ear. Was she overreacting? Was she being unfair? She quickly pushed the thought aside. No, she told herself. She was right. She was always right. The minutes ticked by slowly. The silence on the yacht was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the marina and the occasional nervous cough. Michael stood like a statue, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His friends tried to comfort him, but their words seemed to fall flat. Sarah approached Karen, her face etched with concern. "Karen, with all due respect, I think you're making a mistake," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Michael is a good man. He's a successful businessman and a generous member of the community. He would never do anything to harm anyone." Karen glared at Sarah. "That's what they all say," she retorted. "You can't trust anyone these days. It's better to be safe than sorry." David stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "Karen, you're being ridiculous. You're judging Michael based on his skin color. This is blatant prejudice." Karen gasped, clutching her chest. "How dare you accuse me of being prejudiced?" she exclaimed. "I'm not prejudiced. I just want to protect my community." But her defensive tone betrayed the truth. Before the argument could escalate further, the flashing lights of police cars appeared at the entrance to the marina. 2 officers emerged from the vehicles, their expressions stern. Karen pointed towards Michael's yacht, a smug look on her face. "That's him, officers. He's the trespasser." The officers approached the yacht, their hands resting on their holsters. The joyful afternoon had officially turned into a nightmare. Michael braced himself for what was to come, the weight of injustice pressing down on him. He knew this wasn't just about a noise complaint or a missing permit. This was about something much deeper, something much uglier. And he knew, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that things were about to get a whole lot worse. The police were here, and Karen had already painted him as a criminal. He was a black man, standing on a yacht that some people believed he didn't deserve to own, and the system, he feared, was about to come crashing down on him. The 2 police officers, Officer Miller and Officer Jones, approached Michael with a stern demeanor. Officer Miller, the taller of the 2, spoke first. "Sir, we've received a complaint about trespassing and a disturbance. Can you please provide some identification and explain what's going on here?" Michael, trying to remain calm, reached into his pocket and pulled out his driver's license. "My name is Michael Thompson," he said, his voice steady. "I own this yacht and the slip it's docked in. I was just having a small party with friends." Officer Jones took the license and examined it closely. "And do you have any proof of ownership for the yacht?" "Yes, of course," Michael replied. "The documents are inside the cabin. I can get them for you." He turned towards the cabin door, but Officer Miller stopped him. "Hold on a minute," Officer Miller said, his voice firm. "Before you go anywhere, we need to hear from the complainant." He turned to Karen, who was standing nearby, watching with a satisfied smirk on her face. "Ma'am, can you please explain what happened here?" Karen stepped forward, her voice dripping with indignation. "These people were having a loud and unruly party, disturbing the peace of the marina," she said, pointing at Michael and his friends. "He claims he owns the yacht, but I don't believe him. I think he's trespassing, and he might have even stolen the boat." Officer Miller turned back to Michael, his expression skeptical. "Sir, do you have anything to say about that?" "I told you, I own this yacht," Michael said, his frustration growing. I can show you the paperwork. It's right inside. He reached for the cabin door again, but Officer Miller grabbed his arm. Not so fast, Officer Miller said, his grip tightening. We need to verify your story first. He looked at Officer Jones. Jones, check the registration on this vessel. Officer Jones nodded and walked towards the back of the yacht to examine the hull number. While he was doing that, Michael decided to retrieve the paperwork himself. He gently but firmly removed Officer Miller's hand from his arm and stepped inside the cabin. He quickly located the ownership documents and returned to the deck, holding them out to Officer Miller. Here, he said. This should clear everything up. Officer Miller took the documents and glanced at them briefly. But instead of carefully reviewing them, he simply handed them to Officer Jones, who was returning from checking the hull number. Jones, take a look at these, he said dismissively. Officer Jones examined the documents for a few moments, his expression unreadable. Then, he looked up at Officer Miller and nodded. The name on the registration matches the name on his driver's license, he said. Despite the confirmation of Michael's ownership, Officer Miller remained unconvinced. Even so, he said, his voice hardening, we still received a complaint about a disturbance. And you admit you didn't have a permit for this gathering. I wasn't aware I needed one, Michael protested. It's just a few friends. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, Officer Miller said sternly. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. What? Why? Michael exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. I haven't done anything wrong. I own this boat. You're being detained for questioning regarding the disturbance and the lack of a permit, Officer Miller said. He reached for his handcuffs. Michael's friends gasped in shock. This is ridiculous. Sarah cried out. You can't arrest him for this. Please, officer, there's no need for this, David pleaded. Michael's a respected member of the community. But the officers ignored their protests. Officer Miller placed Michael in handcuffs, his face impassive. The party guests looked on in stunned silence, their faces etched with disbelief and anger. Michael, feeling humiliated and helpless, was led away from his yacht, his dream celebration turned into a nightmare. Karen watched them go, a triumphant glint in her eyes. She had won. Or so she thought. The ride to the police station was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. Michael sat in the back of the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind his back, feeling a mix of humiliation and simmering rage. He couldn't believe this was happening to him. He had worked so hard to build his life, to achieve success, and now he was being treated like a common criminal, all because of one woman's prejudice and the police officer's unwillingness to see past her biased accusations. Every bump in the road felt like another blow to his dignity. He thought about his mother, who had always taught him to respect the law and to believe in justice. What would she think if she saw him now, being hauled away in handcuffs? At the police station, Michael was processed and placed in a holding cell. The cold, sterile environment only amplified his feelings of isolation and despair. He was surrounded by strangers, some of whom looked genuinely dangerous. He felt completely out of place, like he had been dropped into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Meanwhile, back at the marina, Michael's friends were doing everything they could to help. Sarah and David raced to the police station, determined to secure his release. They spoke to the desk sergeant, explaining the situation and emphasizing Michael's character and contributions to the community. They offered to vouch for him, to pay any fines, to do whatever it took to get him out of jail. But their efforts were met with indifference. The desk sergeant, a burly man with a bored expression, listened to their pleas without any sign of empathy. I understand your concern, he said, his voice flat, but Mr. Thompson has been detained for questioning. We can't release him until we've completed our investigation. But he hasn't done anything wrong. Sarah protested. He owns that yacht. He showed the officers the paperwork. That may be, the sergeant replied, but we still need to follow procedure. You'll have to wait until he's been processed and interviewed. And even then, I can't guarantee he'll be released. David stepped forward, his voice filled with anger. This is ridiculous. You're holding him based on a false accusation. This is a clear case of racial profiling. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. I'm warning you, sir, he said, his voice hardening. If you don't calm down, I'll have to ask you to leave. Frustrated and defeated, Sarah and David were forced to leave the police station, their hearts heavy with worry for their friend. They knew that Michael was facing an uphill battle, and they feared that the system was stacked against him. They promised each other that they wouldn't give up, that they would do everything in their power to clear his name and bring him home. Back in the holding cell, Michael sat alone, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being targeted because of his race, because he was a black man who had achieved success. He felt a deep sense of injustice, a burning anger that threatened to consume him. He knew he had to stay strong, to fight for his freedom and his reputation. He knew that his friends were out there, fighting for him too. And he knew, deep down, that he couldn't let Karen's prejudice win. He had to find a way to prove his innocence and expose her lies. He just didn't know how yet. The next morning, Michael was escorted to the courtroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the scene. The room felt cold and impersonal, filled with the hushed whispers of lawyers and the shuffling of papers. He sat at the defendant's table, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt small and vulnerable, overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation. He looked around the courtroom, searching for a friendly face. He saw Sarah and David sitting in the gallery, their eyes filled with concern and support. Their presence gave him a small measure of comfort, but it couldn't completely dispel the feeling of dread that hung heavy in the air. The prosecutor, a stern-faced woman with a sharp voice, laid out the case against Michael. She presented Karen's statement as fact, portraying Michael as a disruptive trespasser who had refused to cooperate with the police. She emphasized the lack of a permit for the gathering, painting it as a deliberate violation of the marina's rules. Michael listened in disbelief as the prosecutor twisted the truth, turning him into a villain in a story he didn't recognize. He wanted to stand up and shout, to defend himself, to explain what really happened. But his lawyer, a kind but somewhat timid man, advised him to remain silent. "Let me handle this," he whispered. "I'll present your side of the story." But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that his lawyer was outmatched, that the system was rigged against him. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of legal jargon and bureaucratic procedures, with no hope of reaching the shore. He felt hopeless. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone rose to their feet. Judge Thompson was a tall, imposing figure with a reputation for fairness and impartiality. As she took her seat on the bench, Michael felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would see through the lies and recognize the injustice that was being perpetrated against him. He watched as Judge Thompson surveyed the courtroom, her eyes scanning the faces in the gallery. And then, her gaze landed on Michael. For a moment, their eyes met, and Michael felt a jolt of recognition. He had seen this judge before. He couldn't quite place where, but he knew he had met her. And then, it hit him. Judge Thompson was the same judge who had presided over the charity event where his company had donated computers to local schools. He had spoken to her briefly that day, thanking her for her commitment to education and community service. A wave of hope washed over him. Maybe this wasn't a lost cause after all. Maybe, just maybe, Judge Thompson would remember him, would recognize his good intentions, would see through Karen's lies and the police officer's misguided actions. He waited with bated breath, his fate hanging in the balance, as Judge Thompson began to speak. The look on her face was unreadable, and Michael couldn't tell if she remembered him or not. He prepared for the worst, but secretly prayed for a miracle. The next few moments would determine his future. Judge Thompson cleared her throat, her gaze fixed on Michael. A small smile played on her lips, a smile that Michael interpreted as a sign of recognition. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm and measured, "I believe we've met before." The prosecutor frowned, confused. Your Honor, I'm not aware of any prior acquaintance between you and the defendant. Judge Thompson ignored the prosecutor's comment. Mr. Thompson, she continued, weren't you the one who generously donated a large number of computers to the city's public schools a few months ago? Michael's heart leaped with joy. She remembered. Yes, Your Honor, he replied, his voice filled with relief. That was my company, Thompson Tech. We believe in giving back to the community. Judge Thompson nodded, her eyes sparkling with warmth. I recall being deeply impressed by your generosity and your commitment to helping young people, she said. I also remember being grateful for the opportunity to personally thank you at the event. She paused, her expression turning serious. I must say, Mr. Thompson, I'm quite surprised to see you here, under these circumstances. The charges being presented seem completely out of character for someone with your reputation and your demonstrated dedication to our community. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Karen, who was sitting in the gallery, looked pale and anxious. The tide was turning, and they both knew it. Judge Thompson turned her attention to the prosecutor. Counselor, she said, her voice sharp, can you explain to me why Mr. Thompson, a respected member of our community and a known philanthropist, is being accused of trespassing and disturbing the peace? The evidence presented so far seems rather flimsy, to say the least. The prosecutor stammered, trying to defend her case. Your Honor, we have a sworn statement from a resident who claims that Mr. Thompson was trespassing and causing a disturbance. We also have evidence that he did not have a permit for the gathering. Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow. A permit? For a small gathering of friends on his own yacht? Is that standard procedure at the Seabreeze Marina? The prosecutor hesitated. Well, Your Honor, it's technically required for any large gathering. And how large was this gathering, Counselor? Judge Thompson pressed. 5 people. 10. Was it truly a threat to the peace and tranquility of the marina? The prosecutor was clearly struggling to maintain her position. Judge Thompson's questions were dismantling her case piece by piece, revealing the absurdity of the charges against Michael. Judge Thompson turned back to Michael, her eyes filled with compassion. Mr. Thompson, she said, I apologize for the inconvenience and the humiliation you've been subjected to. I assure you, this court does not condone the kind of prejudice and assumptions that appear to have led to your arrest. She paused, taking a deep breath. In light of your exemplary character, your contributions to our community, and the lack of credible evidence against you, I am dismissing all charges against you, effective immediately. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Sarah and David leaped to their feet, cheering and applauding. Michael felt a surge of relief and gratitude so powerful that he almost wept. Justice had finally prevailed. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers as Judge Thompson announced her decision. Michael could hardly believe it. He was free. The nightmare was finally over. Judge Thompson banged her gavel, calling the courtroom to order. While I am pleased to dismiss the charges against Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice stern, I am deeply concerned about the actions of the police officers involved in this case. It is the duty of law enforcement to uphold the law and protect the rights of all citizens, not to blindly accept biased accusations and engage in discriminatory practices. She turned her gaze towards Officer Miller and Officer Jones, who were sitting in the back of the courtroom, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Officers Miller and Jones, she said, her voice ringing with disapproval, I expect a full investigation into your handling of this situation. It is imperative that you receive additional training on implicit bias and proper procedure. Your actions in this case were unacceptable and have brought discredit to the entire police force. The officers hung their heads in shame, knowing that their careers were now under scrutiny. Judge Thompson then addressed Michael directly, her expression softening. Mr. Thompson, she said, on behalf of the court and the community, I offer you my sincerest apologies for the inconvenience, the humiliation, and the injustice you have suffered. I hope that this experience will not deter you from continuing your good work and your commitment to making our city a better place. Michael nodded, his heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Your words mean a great deal to me." As Michael left the courtroom, surrounded by his jubilant friends, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He had faced adversity and injustice, but he had emerged victorious. He had proven his innocence and exposed the prejudice that had fueled his arrest. But he knew that his fight wasn't over. He had a responsibility to speak out against discrimination and to advocate for equality. He had a platform, and he intended to use it to make a difference in the world. Sarah and David enveloped him in a warm embrace. "We knew you'd be okay," Sarah said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "We're so proud of you, Michael," David added, clapping him on the back. "You stood up to injustice, and you won." As they walked out of the courthouse, blinking in the bright sunlight, Michael took a deep breath, savoring the taste of freedom. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He was determined to turn this negative experience into a positive one, to use his story to inspire others to fight for justice and equality. He would not let Karen's prejudice define him. He would define himself. And he would start by reclaiming his joy and hosting that party on innovation that he had been so looking forward to. This time, nothing would stop him. News of Michael's ordeal spread through the Seabreeze Marina like wildfire. The story, initially whispered in hushed tones, soon became the topic of heated conversations at the Dockside Cafe, in the community center, and on the marina's online forum. At first, some residents were hesitant to take sides, unsure of the facts and wary of getting involved in a dispute. But as more details emerged, the false accusations, the unjustified arrest, the judge's scathing rebuke of the police, the community's sentiment shifted dramatically. People began to see Karen's actions for what they were, a clear case of prejudice and an abuse of power. They were appalled that Michael, a kind and generous man who had only wanted to celebrate with his friends, had been subjected to such blatant discrimination. A wave of support for Michael swept through the marina. Residents organized a rally in his honor, gathering at the dock with signs and banners proclaiming their solidarity. They decorated innovation with balloons and streamers, transforming it into a symbol of resilience and hope. Many people who had previously been intimidated by Karen's overbearing personality now found the courage to speak out against her behavior. They shared stories of her past complaints and her tendency to make assumptions based on race and appearance. They realized that her actions towards Michael were not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of biased behavior. The HOA board, under mounting pressure from the community, called an emergency meeting to address the situation. Residents packed the meeting room, eager to voice their concerns and demand accountability. They condemned Karen's actions in no uncertain terms, accusing her of damaging the marina's reputation and creating a hostile environment for minority residents. "What Karen did was wrong, plain and simple," said Mrs. Rodriguez, a longtime resident of the marina. "She judged Michael based on the color of his skin, and she used her position on the HOA to try to ruin his life. That's not what our community is about. We need to send a clear message that prejudice and discrimination will not be tolerated at Seabreeze Marina," added Mr. Johnson, another resident. "Karen's actions have caused irreparable harm, and she needs to be held accountable." The HOA board listened intently to the residents' concerns, their faces etched with gravity. They knew that they had to take decisive action to restore trust and heal the divisions that Karen's actions had created. They voted unanimously to censure Karen and strip her of her position on the HOA board. But that wasn't enough for some residents. They felt that Karen's actions warranted a more severe punishment. They started a petition calling for her to be banned from the marina community altogether. The petition quickly gained hundreds of signatures, demonstrating the overwhelming support for Michael and the widespread condemnation of Karen's behavior. Even Mr. Fluffernutter, Karen's cat, seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. He started spending more time outside her condo, seeking affection from other residents and pointedly ignoring Karen's attempts to lure him back inside. The community was rallying around Michael, showing him that he was not alone in his fight for justice and equality. They were determined to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment at Seabreeze Marina, where everyone felt safe and respected, regardless of their race or background. The dark cloud that had hung over the marina was beginning to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and unity. Initially, Michael was hesitant to take further legal action against Karen. He just wanted to put the whole ordeal behind him and move on with his life. He had his freedom, his reputation was restored, and the community was behind him. Wasn't that enough? But his friends and the community urged him to reconsider. They argued that Karen's actions had caused him significant harm, both personally and professionally. Her false accusations had damaged his reputation, caused him emotional distress, and disrupted his business. They believed that she needed to be held accountable for her actions, not just for his sake, but for the sake of everyone who had been a victim of prejudice and discrimination. "Michael, you can't just let her get away with this," Sarah argued. "She needs to understand that her actions have consequences. If you don't sue her, she'll just keep doing this to other people. You have a responsibility to send a message that prejudice and discrimination will not be tolerated," David added. "By suing Karen, you'll be standing up for everyone who has been unfairly targeted because of their race or background." The outpouring of support from the community also played a significant role in Michael's decision. He received countless messages of encouragement, urging him to fight for justice and to hold Karen accountable for her actions. People offered to contribute to his legal fund, to testify on his behalf, and to do whatever they could to help him win his case. After careful consideration, Michael decided to take their advice. He realized that he couldn't simply ignore what had happened. He had a responsibility to seek justice, not just for himself, but for all those who had been victims of prejudice and discrimination. He contacted a prominent civil rights attorney, Ms. Johnson, who had a long and successful track record of fighting for justice and equality. Ms. Johnson listened intently to Michael's story, her eyes flashing with anger and determination. She agreed to take his case, believing that it was a clear example of defamation and wrongful accusation. "What Karen did was not only wrong, it was illegal," Ms. Johnson said. "She made false statements about you that damaged your reputation and caused you significant harm. We're going to hold her accountable for her actions, and we're going to send a message that prejudice and discrimination have no place in our society." Ms. Johnson filed a lawsuit against Karen, seeking damages for defamation, wrongful accusation, and emotional distress. The lawsuit alleged that Karen had acted with malice and reckless disregard for the truth when she made false statements about Michael to the police and to others in the community. The news of the lawsuit sent shockwaves through the marina. Some residents were supportive of Michael's decision, while others were apprehensive about the potential for further conflict. But Karen was stunned when she received the lawsuit. She had never been sued before, and the thought of facing legal consequences for her actions filled her with anxiety and fear. She hired a lawyer, a slick and expensive attorney who assured her that he could get the case dismissed. But as the legal process unfolded, Karen's confidence began to crumble. Ms. Johnson, Michael's attorney, proved to be a formidable opponent. She was relentless in her pursuit of the truth, and she skillfully presented evidence that revealed a pattern of biased behavior on Karen's part. Ms. Johnson interviewed numerous residents of the marina, who testified about Karen's past complaints and her tendency to make assumptions based on race and appearance. They shared stories of her discriminatory remarks and her attempts to enforce rules in a way that unfairly targeted minority residents. One witness, a young Hispanic woman named Isabella, testified that Karen had repeatedly harassed her about her landscaping, claiming that her flowers were too colorful and didn't fit the aesthetic of the marina. Another witness, an elderly Asian man named Mr. Lee, testified that Karen had accused him of illegally subletting his condo, simply because he had a few friends visiting from out of town. Ms. Johnson also presented evidence that Karen had a history of making false reports to the police. She had previously called the police on a black family who were having a barbecue in their backyard, claiming that they were making too much noise. She had also called the police on a group of teenagers who were playing basketball in the park, claiming that they were loitering and causing trouble. The evidence painted a damning picture of Karen as a prejudiced and vindictive woman who was quick to judge and quick to accuse. Her lawyer tried to argue that her actions were simply the result of her being a concerned citizen who was trying to protect her community. But the jury wasn't buying it. As the trial progressed, Karen became increasingly isolated and ostracized. Many of her former friends and allies turned their backs on her, realizing that her actions were indefensible. She became a pariah in the marina, avoided and whispered about by her neighbors. Even Mr. Fluffernutter, her beloved cat, seemed to have lost interest in her, preferring to spend his days lounging on other residents' patios. The legal consequences of her actions were mounting. Not only was she facing a hefty financial penalty, but her reputation was in tatters, and her social standing was in ruins. Karen was beginning to realize the full extent of the damage she had caused, not only to Michael, but to herself as well. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and she had no one to blame but herself. The truth was out, and Karen's downfall was inevitable. The jury found Karen guilty of defamation and wrongful accusation. The judge ordered her to pay Michael a significant sum of money to compensate him for the damages he had suffered. But the financial penalty was only part of her punishment. The HOA board, responding to the overwhelming pressure from the community, took further action against Karen. They held a special meeting to vote on whether to ban her from the marina community altogether. The meeting was packed with residents, all eager to voice their opinions. The debate was heated and emotional. Some residents argued that Karen deserved a second chance, that she had learned her lesson and should be allowed to remain in the community. Others argued that her actions were unforgivable and that she posed a threat to the safety and well-being of other residents. "We can't just let her stay here after what she did," said Mrs. Rodriguez, her voice trembling with anger. "She tried to ruin Michael's life, and she created a hostile environment for everyone who doesn't look like her. We need to send a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." "I used to think Karen was just a bit of a busybody," added Mr. Johnson. "But now I see that she's a deeply prejudiced person who is capable of causing real harm. I don't want her living in our community anymore." After hours of debate, the HOA board finally took a vote. The result was overwhelming. A majority of the board members voted to ban Karen from the marina community. The decision was met with cheers and applause from the residents in the room. Karen, who was not present at the meeting, received the news with a mixture of disbelief and despair. She couldn't believe that she was being kicked out of her home, the place where she had lived for so many years. She tried to appeal the decision, but her efforts were unsuccessful. The HOA board stood by their decision, citing her pattern of biased behavior and the overwhelming opposition from the community. Karen was forced to sell her condo and move out of the marina. She left in disgrace, her reputation in tatters and her social standing in ruins. She had lost everything: her home, her friends, her position in the community. All because of her prejudice and her unwillingness to accept others who were different from her. As Karen drove away from the Seabreeze Marina for the last time, she couldn't help but. After the lawsuit was settled and Karen was banished from the marina, Michael finally felt like he could breathe again. He had faced adversity and injustice, but he had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. He decided to use his experience to advocate for justice and equality. He spoke out publicly about the prejudice he had faced and the importance of standing up against discrimination. He shared his story with the media, with community groups, and with anyone who would listen. His words resonated with people from all walks of life. He received countless messages of support and encouragement, thanking him for his courage and his willingness to speak out. He became a symbol of hope for those who had been unfairly targeted because of their race or background. Michael also focused his efforts on helping young people. He volunteered at local schools, mentoring students and encouraging them to pursue their dreams. He shared his own story of overcoming obstacles and achieving success, inspiring them to believe in themselves and to never give up. He established a scholarship fund for minority students, providing financial assistance to help them attend college and pursue careers in technology. He wanted to create opportunities for young people who might otherwise be denied access to education and success. He also worked with law enforcement agencies to promote diversity and inclusion. He shared his experience with police officers, helping them to understand the impact of implicit bias and the importance of treating all citizens with respect and dignity. Michael's efforts were widely recognized and celebrated. He received numerous awards and accolades for his advocacy work. He was invited to speak at conferences and events around the world. He became a role model for young people, showing them that it was possible to overcome adversity and to make a positive impact on the world. He even returned to the Seabreeze Marina and hosted a party on innovation, inviting all of his friends and neighbors to celebrate with him. The party was a huge success, a symbol of unity and the story of Michael and Karen serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of fairness, understanding, and standing up against prejudice. It shows us that even in the face of adversity, it is possible to overcome injustice and to create a more inclusive world. Michael's triumph over Karen's prejudice is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of community support. It demonstrates that when people come together to fight for what is right, they can achieve anything. The story also highlights the importance of holding individuals accountable for their actions. Karen's downfall serves as a warning to those who would engage in discriminatory behavior, showing them that there are consequences for their actions. But perhaps the most important lesson of the story is that prejudice is a learned behavior, and it can be unlearned. Karen's story is a tragedy, but it is also an opportunity for reflection and growth. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to challenge our own biases and to promote understanding and respect for others. Michael continued to thrive, using his success to help others and to build a more inclusive world. He expanded his scholarship fund, providing opportunities for even more minority students to attend college. He worked with local businesses to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace. He became a champion for social justice, using his voice to advocate for policies that would create a more equitable society. He never forgot the lessons he had learned from his experience with Karen. He remained vigilant against prejudice and discrimination, always ready to stand up for those who were being unfairly targeted. He knew that the fight for equality was far from over, but he was determined to do his part to make the world a better place. And so, the story of Michael and Karen became a legend in the Seabreeze Marina, a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, prejudice can exist, but that with courage, determination, and the support of a community, it can be overcome. The echoes of the laughter and music from Michael's parties on innovation served as a constant reminder that diversity is a strength and that everyone deserves to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. It was a lesson etched in the heart of the community, passed down through generations, ensuring that the story of Michael and Karen would continue to inspire hope and promote understanding for years to come. And Mr. Fluffernutter? He finally found a loving home with Mrs. Rodriguez, where he spent his days lounging in the sun and receiving all the affection he could ever want, a small but significant victory for kindness and compassion in a world that sometimes seemed to lack both.